Hi everyone, welcome to the channel. This is Moyna Bass Fishers. I am Jim Moyna, the official truck driver of Moyna Bass Fishers Enterprises. Anyhow, that would be a Chevrolet. Anyhow, this video is going to be about a question somebody threw in the comments this week or last week. And very simple question. And an interesting it's an interesting topic. The question is, does fishing pressure hurt fishing? The answer is yes and no. All right, now let's look at the yes. I believe yes, it hurts trophy fishing. It I believe that the more pressure you put on a body of water, the more pressure that body of water sees, the fewer older fish you have in that body of water. And it's the old fish that, of course, fish grow throughout their whole life. So the older they get, the bigger they get. Why do I come up with this conclusion? Well, it's based on just what I've witnessed over the years in fishing small bodies of water, big bodies of water, waters with grass, waters without grass, waters with lots of fishing pressure, waters with very little fishing pressure or no fishing pressure. So let me just give you this example. Back in 1984, when I was in my second year in the Tackle Busters Bass Club, we had it was the first time I'd ever been to the Whitefish chain of lakes north of Brainerd, Minnesota. And my dad, so our club had a tournament there. So my dad went out there pre-fishing and he literally caught 3 6-pound bass in one day out there. And I also remember pre-fishing back then, catching four and a half, fives, 5.5s. But there weren't a lot of fish. There wasn't a lot of them, but it was just a population of old bass, largemouth bass, but not a huge population of them. Now, fast forward to today. Let's say you have a bass tournament on the Whitefish chain now with like 70 boats. I would bet money that the big bass of the tournament would be less than 5.25 pounds. The largemouth, okay, there are some hefty smallies in that lake too, but if you just look at the largemouths, yeah, it's hard to get one over 5.25 pounds there, very hard. And I don't even know. I mean, the 6-pounders are unheard of. Also, let's go back. Let's rewind back to 1984 again. I also remember hearing within recent years prior to 1984 of an 8-pounder coming out of the Whitefish chain. So, and those fish you just don't see those fish out of the Whitefish chain anymore. However, you see lots of fish. You see the population of largemouths in the Whitefish chain is probably 20 times what it used to be, but you just don't see the big ones. Conversely, here's another story. This story was relayed to me by Billy Linder many years ago, but he was saying that when his dad and uncle first moved to Brainerd and started catching bass out of Wilson's Bay in Gull Lake, that there was a good number. They were catching on a regular basis 5 to 6 pound largemouths when they first got there. Now, it's very difficult to get a 6-pound largemouth out of Gull Lake. You just don't see them. And to get 5-pounders, I mean, they're there, but there's just not as many. Even though there were way fewer fish. These are really old fish. There were way fewer bass in Gull Lake chain back then, but you had these just old sentinel type bass of just precious creatures. They're just not there no more. However, there are tons of 1 to 2.5 pounders in Gull Lake, just like whitefish, tons of them. But trying to get one over 4.5 pounds, you wade through a ton of fish to maybe even get one that big. All right, another example, Leech Lake in Minnesota. That lake, and let me just make this comment about Minnesota in general and its fishing. Minnesota's the walleye fish has always been the king of Minnesota and still is. So when I'm talking back in the early 80s and so forth, the amount of bass fishing pressure was minuscule to what we see now. Minuscule. So let's just keep that in mind throughout what I'm talking about. So now let's look at Leech Lake. Leech Lake was a walleye mecca, still is. Muskie still is. Yellow perch. Hardly anybody touched the largemouth bass many years ago. Like probably not until the mid 80s that people started doing that, and it was unbelievable. There were there were six to get a 6-pounder and a 5-pounder and that sort of type fish. I mean, that was a realistic thing to get 6 pounds. I mean, I've seen a 613 come out of that chain, and I've heard of 7s back then. Nowadays, they're just like those other ones. There's more largemouths in Leech Lake than what there was 30, 40 years ago, but the number of 5 to 6 pounders to 6.5 pounders just isn't the same. And Leech Lake has had a lot more bass fishing pressure over the years. In fact, the Bassmaster Opens even went there last year. So, and it was won with smallmouth, by the way. So the largemouth just are not, they're just not there to what they used to be. And now I can make also examples of, another example would be, if you can get onto a private lake in Minnesota with the right fertility, you go in there and it's just nothing but 5 to 6 pounders. Well, you got undersized fish too, but your chances of getting 5 to 6 pounders is such a real thing. And even some of the public lakes where my friend Joe Thrun and I used to go to, and he does still quite a bit, but not me so much. But some of these smaller lakes, I'd had very little bass fishing pressure. It was nothing. I mean, every trip he'd catch, at least 1 over 5 pounds on some of these lakes, at least, and sometimes a 6-pounder. And now it's more of a rarity to catch 1 over 5 pounds. And back in the day when he was catching these 5 to 6 pounders out of these lakes, there would be no bass boats at the public landing. Now he can't go to these lakes without a bass, even during the middle of the week, without a bass boat trailer being at one of these lakes and landings. Sure, the bass fishing's still good in those lakes, but the super old fish just that 6-pounders just aren't there. Just are not there. So to me, it's like if you let a fishery just develop without fishing pressure, you're just going to end up with some really old fish that are really big. Another example, I've got a friend of mine. I haven't talked to him for a few years. I should call this gentleman. His name's T.R. Fuller. He used to fish as a koi angler on the FLW Tour many years ago. But he has a private pond in Alabama. Nobody fishes it. It's private ponds, maybe, 100 acres at best. But there's some monster bass in there because they never see fishing lures unless if it's him or somebody in his family showing up. And he took me out there one time, and I think we hooked up with 3 monsters and got 2 of them in the boat that day. And those are just old fish that they're not bothered. And he literally caught some, like, he had one in there they caught that was like 16, 17 pounds or some ridiculous size like that. And down south, you don't see fish like that. You don't see fish like that. Even in the best lakes, like Lake Guntersville, for example, awesome, tons of quality fish, tons of 3 to 6, 7 pounders in there. But I honestly believe that it's just, as pressured as that lakes get, you probably are just not allowing those super old specimens to, enough of them to really show up in the catch, to where you have like 10 pounders. I mean, there's probably 10 pounders. I really don't know. There's probably are 10 pounders caught out of Guntersville, but probably not many. But I would bet if you, now I'm not saying to do this, but let's just, in the world of fantasy here, let's say nobody fished Lake Guntersville for like 5 years. And then all of a sudden you could fish there after 5 years of no fishing. I promise you that there would be more 8s and 9 pounders caught than ever seen before out of that lake. So just because of the absence of fishing pressure. Now, let's talk about the no part. The original question, does fishing pressure hurt fishing? Now, I can say no in terms of numbers of fish. Lakes that have good recruitment, meaning good spawn, have good habitat, and have forage, it seems like those lakes are always replenishing their younger specimens. So like here in Minnesota, like those examples I mentioned earlier, Gull Lake, Leech Lake, the Whitefish Chain, there's tremendous numbers of 1 to 2.5, 3 pounders in those lakes. And why? Because there's good grass in all those lakes. When I say grass, I mean the submergent and emergent vegetation. You get good recruitment of the spawn, meaning when the fish spawn, the eggs hatch and you get the little fry. Well, if you have all this vegetation in the lake, the fry are able to hide from predation. So you just get large numbers of fish, coming up through the chain. And you just end up with great numbers of fish. So in that respect, and it's hard to really, if you're into catching 30, 40 bass a day, that's great fishing. I like having that experience. I like going on a lake where I know it's got a lot of fish and having the potential to land on a school of fish where for an hour straight I'm doing nothing but casting and reeling in a fish. That's a lot of fun. But I also like to mix it in those occasions where I launch the boat and I have a realistic shot at catching my biggest fish of the year out of that lake. So anyways, it just kind of depends on how you measure good fishing. But numbers, for some people it's numbers, some people it's trophies. So fishing pressure hurts the trophy fishing. You're taking out too many of the old fish are just being killed. And why? Well, there's tournament mortality. When heavily fished lakes, you do have tournament mortality. It's a small number. It's a very small percentage, but it takes effect. Then also you have the incidental kill. When you're just out fun fishing, you catch a fish and it's eating your crankbait down its throat. The hooks are in the gills. The gills are bleeding really bad because the hooks are in the gills. The fish loses a lot of blood. Those fish sometimes die. You might release him and he slowly swims to the bottom. He might survive, he might die. You don't know. And who knows? And how many times let's say you break off a big fish. Let's say you got a big topwater and the fish comes up, grabs it, you break it off. Well, now that fish is swimming around with a topwater in its face for how long? I mean, how long does it take to rust those hooks out, right? How long? I mean, what kind of effect is having a topwater stuck on your face? What kind of effect is that going to have on its ability to feed? I mean, these are questions we may not know the answers to, but my point is all this kind of stuff, all this kind of pressure. And I've even had where I've caught an old fish unhooked. It was hooked right in a normal spot where there's no bleeding, no extra trauma. Unhook it, and then it's like I'm holding the fish and literally the thing's limp. And then I lay it in the water and it's just limp. just laying there. It's like, I don't know if the fish had a heart attack when I catch it, or a stroke or whatever, but just the fight, just this old fish, just reeling them in and unhooking them. And it's a quick unhook. It's not like I'm, like I said, it's an easy spot, unhooks, no trauma out of the ordinary. And then I release him, and the fish just lays there and is limp. And it's not a fish caught out of super deep water either. It's just a fish that, for whatever reason, just decides that, it just dies right there. So there is some, even though catch and release is so valuable to our fisheries. It's without that, we'd have it. Without catch and release, there would be bad fish. There would be bad fishing in heavily pressured lakes. It would have an effect without catch and release. But anyhow, so it's just hard for an old fish to just dodge all these, traps to get old enough to where they're a really big specimen, because, old fish keep growing as they grow older and older and older. So until eventually they die. So anyhow, that is my answer. So let's repeat it. Does fishing pressure hurt fishing? Yes, I believe it hurts trophy fishing, but no for numbers of fish. I do not, especially in a lake that has really good recruitment, like a Lake Guntersville, or like a Gull Lake or Whitefish, or that type of lake. So that's my answer. And that was just about this video is just about largemouth. So keep that in mind as well. I need to think about this and process this for smallmouth, because I don't have as much to draw on for the smallmouth, because my experience, using my own experience, go back to the 80s, is mostly largemouth fishing they did back then. So with smallmouth, it's probably the same situation, but I don't have as many examples of my own personal experience to draw upon for smallmouth. But anyways, thanks for watching the video. Over and out.